Hello and welcome to Written Words, which comes to you today from a slightly different location to the usual one. Unfortunately, the bookcase which I usually sit next to when I'm making my recordings has fallen apart and turns out to be a slightly bigger job than we'd expected to mend it. So temporarily, Written Words HQ has moved to a different room. In my last video, I looked at a timeline of the English language and how it had evolved over the centuries from the various different groups of people that came to the British Isles and brought their languages with them. In today's video, we're going to look at 4 key works of literature that illustrate this evolution. I'm going to begin with one of the earliest pieces of English literature that we know about, and that is Beowulf. This particular edition I find slightly misleading because the way the cover is designed, it looks as if Seamus Heaney wrote Beowulf. Seamus Heaney isn't the author of Beowulf. Seamus Heaney is the translator of this particular edition of Beowulf. Beowulf was written in Anglo-Saxon or Old English. We don't know exactly when it was written. There is a very old manuscript of it which exists in the British Library, but no one knows whether that's the original version or a copy. So it's estimated it was written somewhere between the 7th and the 10th century. So in the context of our timeline, that is before the Normans came to England. That's before William the Conqueror defeated King Harold and was made King of England. So that's before the French influence arrived on the English language. It was written during Anglo-Saxon times. We think probably somewhere in East Anglia was where it was written. So it was written in England in Anglo-Saxon times, and the Vikings in Scandinavia would also have been active around that time too, which we can tell by the content of the story. Although the story was written in England in the Anglo-Saxon language, the story itself tells of a terrible monster called Grendel who terrorizes the people of Scandinavia, and the hero Beowulf steps in to rid Scandinavia of this terrible scourge. So it's an epic poem with a very entertaining storyline. It was presumably written to be performed aloud to entertain people, because not many people would have been able to read at that time. And according to the introduction by Seamus Heaney, he has set out in his translation to produce a version that would be suitable for performing, an entertaining version rather than a scholarly one. This particular edition gives us just the first page of the original text for interest, and the rest of the book is the modern English version. So let's have a little look at just the first few lines of the original language. It looks something like this. At first glance, it doesn't look very much like English at all. It does have a slightly Nordic feel to it. It looks perhaps Icelandic, and there are some words in there that look German. But if we zoom in onto some of the words, we can see that there are already echoes in there of modern English, the English that we know today. Let's highlight a few words now and see what clues we can find that tell us that this is the ancestor of the English that we speak today. Straight away, we can recognise one particular word as being exactly the same as we use it today, under. And oft, we can guess what that means. It means often. Then, if we look at the first line, Dana means Danes. It's talking about the Danes from Denmark. So we can see a similarity there. And the last word on the first line has DAG inside it. DAG exists today in Scandinavian languages. It means day, and it's also very similar to the German word Tag. But it's also easy to see how our modern English word day has come from that word. And then the last line of this little extract looks very strange at first glance. But if I tell you that that strange letter in the first of those 4 words was replaced by th, which we use now for the sound, we can work out that that word is that. And the next word is was. The word after it is good. And the last word, which seems the strangest of all, if we pronounce the C with a k sound, we get kinning. And that word means king. So we can see how the word king has evolved from this spelling. So to help us understand what this passage is actually all about, let's take a look at what Seamus Heaney says. His version of this little extract is, "So, the Spear Danes in days gone by, and the kings who ruled them had courage and greatness. We have heard of those princes' heroic campaigns. There was Shield Sheafson, scourge of many tribes, a wrecker of mead benches, rampaging among foes. This terror of the hall troops had come far. A foundling to start with, he would flourish later on, as his powers waxed and his worth was proved. In the end, each clan on the outlying coasts, beyond the whale road, had to yield to him and begin to pay tribute. That was one good king." Now let's move on a few centuries to another great work of literature, and that is the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. And we have some more precise dates for this one. It was written between 1387 and 1400. So the language has evolved now. We've had the Norman invasion, we've had the influence of French, and at the time when Chaucer was writing, there was a move towards standardization of the language. There were all kinds of different versions of the spoken language around the country, and when the written word became more widespread, there became a need to standardize the language so that people all over could read the same writing. And the language that Chaucer uses is no longer called Old English. This is now classed as Middle English. It's neither Old English nor Modern English, it's somewhere in the middle, so it's called Middle English. So let's take a look at a short passage from the prologue of the Canterbury Tales. When we look at the language in this passage, it's now much more recognisable as English. A lot of the spellings are different to the ones that we're used to now, but if we read it out aloud, we can figure out what most of it means. "A knight there was, and that a worthy man, that fro the time that he first began to riden out, he loved chivalry, truth and honour, freedom and courtesy. Full worthy was he in his lord's war, and thereto had he ridden no man fear, as well in Christendom as heathenness, and ever honoured for his worthiness." So it sounds like English, it looks like English with some strange spellings in it. No study of the evolution of the English language would be complete without mentioning Shakespeare. Macbeth was first performed in 1606, so just over 200 years since the publication of the Canterbury Tales. So let's have a look now at how the English language has changed in those 200 years. Lady Macbeth says, "Out, damned spot, out, I say. 1, 2, why then 'tis time to do it. Hell is murky. Fie, my lord, fie, a soldier and afeard. What need we fear who knows it, when none can call our power to account? Yet who would have thought the old man to have so much blood in him?" Again, this is very recognisable as English. It's another degree easier to read than the Chaucer was. The spellings are now mostly recognisable. Shakespeare does use one or two words that we no longer use. For example, fie. Fie is used to express disgust or disapproval. Something along the lines of, for goodness sake, or possibly something stronger in modern English. And afeard, for example, we know what that means, but we wouldn't really use it in conversation in the 21st century. But on the whole, this is quite recognisable as English and quite easy to read compared with the previous two texts we've looked at. Although there may be one or two teenagers studying Shakespeare for their GCSEs who disagree with me on that. Our final text in this video was written another 200 years after Macbeth, and that is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. In between the time of Shakespeare and the time of Jane Austen, there were quite a few developments in the English language, and one of the key ones was the arrival of the dictionary. Literacy was becoming more common. More people were able to read. People read for pleasure. Many of the characters in Jane Austen's books read novels. And so yet another level of standardisation was needed. One of the first dictionaries of the English language was produced by Samuel Johnson in 1755. It was 7 years in the making, but it paved the way for a whole succession of dictionaries and grammar reference books that we still rely on today. If we want to check the correct spelling of a word, or if we want to clarify a grammar rule, we look it up. We look it up in the Oxford Dictionary, the Merriam-Webster, the Chambers, and so on, a whole line of highly renowned reference works that probably wouldn't exist if it were not for Samuel Johnson's original work. So Jane Austen was writing in the era of the dictionary. She uses words and expressions that we still use today. Some of them may feel a little old-fashioned and we might not use them in everyday conversation, but we certainly understand what she's talking about in her books. So here is the opening of Pride and Prejudice. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However little known the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entering a neighbourhood, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered as the rightful property of some one or other of their daughters. "My dear Mr. Bennet," said his lady to him one day, "have you heard that Netherfield Park is let at last?" Mr. Bennet replied that he had not. "But it is," returned she, "for Mrs. Long has just been here, and she told me all about it." Mr. Bennet made no answer. "Do you not want to know who has taken it?" cried his wife impatiently. "You want to tell me, and I have no objection to hearing it." So all the language in here is perfectly understandable to a modern reader. There are no strange words, there are no unusual spellings. The words are just the way we would use them now. Perhaps if someone now were to speak in the style of Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, we might think them a bit old-fashioned. We might find them a little odd, but we would understand perfectly what they were saying. So by the time Jane Austen was writing Pride and Prejudice in 1813, which is now over 200 years ago, she was using the same kind of language that we use today. The language was now established. It's no longer Old English, Middle English, or Shakespearean English. It is modern English. It's the language that we use now, and it hasn't changed hugely in the last 200 years. Thank you very much for joining me on this literary journey through time. I have a couple more videos to come on the subject of the origins of the English language. We're going to look at the words thee and thou in a little more detail, and there is also a writing prompt to come, so do watch this space for more videos. And in the meantime, do feel free to explore our other videos on the English language and its literature. Once again, thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next video, and in the meantime, happy reading and happy writing.